but it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Melanie now. Welcome, Melanie.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you so much. I am just watching the number of people coming into the room, and it's just, yeah, it's phenomenal. So I'm not sure whether you can see the video of me. If you see my face looking like, what the, that's because I'm looking at the chat and I'm looking at the video and I'm looking at the participants and you all coming in here. So thank you so much, Lisa, for inviting me to present around the concept of producing digital content for on-demand online learning. I'm really excited to be here. I'm relatively new to the inclusive education team. I've only been in the role since the middle of February, so I started just as we started to kind of get stressed about COVID. So I'm not sure if you can imagine or not, my work has just gone through the absolute roof. Thank you as you come in to introduce yourself within the webinar chat. I'm also blown away by how many people from the Philippines here. It's really super cool to see you all. And it's also really nice. There's about 5 or 6 people online that I know through my networks, which I'm not sure actually makes me a little bit more nervous to do this. So the way that we sort of have the next 55 minutes or an hour or so structured is, I would like it to be interactive in the sense that use that text chat, give us some back channel on the chat. If you've got questions, put them in the chat or the Q&A. Lisa and I will do our best to answer them as we go along. What we're going to do is we're going to look at, I'm going to ask you some questions first. We've got some polls that we're going to put together and ask you some questions. We're going to look at what on-demand, online and on-demand looks like. And as I'm sort of presenting, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you questions, pop the questions in the text chat so that we can feed them back in. We're going to look at some considerations for producing on-demand online content, and then sort of think of some examples and some places of from where to start. So I've been working in learning and education for nearly 20 years. My specialisation is digital content, and I'm absolutely passionate about learner experience, and it's one of the reasons why I'm so keen to have all of your comments and questions come through the text chat, because regardless of what time it is in your time zone, it's got to be interactive. You've got to have a chance to, sort of get your questions in and hear those answers. And because we have over 220 people in the room at the moment, we're a little bit limited by some of the interactions. So just hammer that text chat for us. So getting started, Lise, can we have the first poll, please? The first poll that we're going to do is just, where are you in the world? I have a feeling that when we see this, where are you in the world, the Asia section is just going to go through the roof, because there are so many people. I reckon that there's probably about 60 people from the Philippines easily in the session at the moment. So it's just phenomenal to see how many people. So North America and South America, with the time difference, I guess we can expect that people aren't going to be staying up until midnight to join the session, so they can catch the recordings.
Okay, I think
Fabulous.
I'm going to end polling. We've got 177 people who voted. Actually, that's still rising, so I'm going to give you another 10 seconds. If you can't access the poll, for example, you might be on your phone or on a different browser, please drop your response in the chat to where are you in the world. We've summarized this under continents due to we can't list every country possible, but I'm excited to show you the results. So I might end the polling, and then let's see. So I think we've got pretty strong evidence. It's fantastic to see. And I also realized I didn't vote. I'm based in London right now, so that could have been one extra for Europe. But yeah, it's fantastic to see a very strong amount of people based in Asia. So we know who we're speaking to today, Melanie.
Fabulous. So the next question that I've got is, what is your role in the sector? Now, as Lisa shows the poll for that, I thought I'd be super tricksy and in this Google sheet and having another sheet so that I could pop in the answers, pop in the here we go. I thought that I could pop in the percentages and it would look super cool that we could do that live. And yet, of course, as happens with technology, it just doesn't work sometimes. So I'm going to do it like this so we can see the results come in front of us. So it looks like loads of high school teachers, a few university and higher ed, a little bit in HR, a little bit in training and facilitation. We've got some technical experts. We've even got some media and comms people here. Oh yeah, unfortunately you can only tick one item, even though you're probably very multi-skilled and have and might be able to tick more than that. So what are we looking at? So about 5%.
Okay, yeah, we've got a, shall I end polling? Do we want to see the results?
Yeah, let's see the results.
Okay, fantastic. And it's worth saying, yeah, I think we've got a good split across education and non-profit. So recognizing that everyone who's involved in this COVID-19 response is essentially a humanitarian worker because they're responding to a crisis. So it's great to see whether you're from a humanitarian organization like a non-profit or in the education sector. It's great to see you represented today. So I'm just going to share these and you should be able to see, there we go.
Fabulous. And I think, you know, one of the things that it highlights is that we face challenges across the education sector, and those challenges are quite unique regardless of whether it's early childhood, primary, whether it's high school, vocational, higher education, or training and development. And I think, you know, the fact that we've got so many people who are in the high school space shows that there's a real need to have meaningful online on-demand content for our high schools, in fact all of our sectors. So the next question that I've got for you is how the question has worded. Which of the following statements best describes you? So Lise, would you mind doing the next poll, please? So what I've got here is, rather than doing like a 0 to 5 or ratings and those scales, what I thought was, I just don't know where to start, or I've started but it's slow, I'm getting there, I'm pretty far along, or I've got it under control. I'm here for the hints and tips. I want to see where everybody else is up to. This sort of information is really useful because it helps me frame some of the stories that I might tell. Yeah. One of the stories that I often tell when I'm talking about developing content was when I first started lecturing. I was lecturing in a vocational college in South Australia. I had my students watch a video, and I remember the whole time I was young, I was nervous. I had this sense that I was doing it wrong. What if somebody finds out that I'm showing a video in my class? What if that's wrong? And that feeling has stayed with me, even though the toolkit of things, my skills and my abilities have increased and expanded. My confidence has expanded since then. That feeling of surveillance has really stayed with me. That feeling of what if somebody sees what I'm doing and I'm doing it wrong? What if they find out that I'm doing it wrong? And I think that's a really important thing to think about, because we've got, looks like we've got about 35% of the respondents here have said, I don't know where to start, or I've started but it's slow. I think we need to recognise that it's okay to feel nervous, especially if you're new to the space, because yeah, it's okay to feel nervous, and we have to be kind to ourselves as we go through and learn all of these new skills. And when you put online content together, it is a different level of surveillance because people can see your work. So there's a different level of personalization. So I'll start the conversation here by saying it's okay to feel it's okay to feel nervous, and it's okay to be kind to yourself as you go through this journey, because there's a huge amount of pressure on us at the moment. So thanks very much for that poll, Lisa. That's awesome. So I guess that, it's always good to get started with just some definitional stuff. We have had to move very quickly into a world where we have to kind of make sure that we're on the same page with the language that we're using. And so one of the things that I'm always quite intrigued at is what we're doing now is online and the ability to be able to access the link to watch the recording when you want and where you want it is on demand. So in a sense, even though this is a live virtual classroom context or a webinar context, we are actually in the process of producing digital content for our on-demand learning. So the first point that I want to raise is that on-demand learning can look like so many different things. So it's challenging sometimes with your, with the stakeholders, with your students, with parents, with government, with managers. We work in a context where we don't often have the same kind of an shared understanding of what digital content is, what online is, what on-demand is. So we often think, depending on where you're from, there is the context. We often hear words around tablets and computers and phones and smartphones and those sorts of things. But we have to recognise that online can also look like very different to depending on the developmental context that you're working with. So I'm just throwing it out there that even though some of the pictures and some of the examples that I might give might sound like I'm implying high tech, I'm really not, because we need to make sure that when we're thinking about online, we're thinking about the technologies that our participants and our students and our learners have access to. When it comes to the concept of on-demand though, I was looking for a great photo to represent this, and it came down to having so many different ways of representing what on-demand looks like. And so I think that I'm just going to say that on-demand quite simply means that your students, your learners, your participants can access the materials when they want to, on their demand. So when we're thinking about this online on-demand concept, what does it look like? Or what does it sound like? Or what does it feel like? Or what does it smell like? Oftentimes when we're thinking about online and we're thinking about these technologies, we often are so overwhelmed by the size of the job that we have in front of us that we need to be able to take a step back and say, what does on-demand online actually look like? And what could it actually look like? So this diagram here is a little bit of a continuum. Somebody's just asked for full screen mode. I've just expanded that a little bit more. Okay, so when we're thinking about on demand, we can break it down into a bit of a continuum. So the continuum is starting with words and pictures and audio. Now, when we think about this this type of continuum, and I welcome your feedback as to whether you agree with this type of continuum or whether you disagree, we could probably look at a range of different ways of setting up a continuum. What I wanted to do here was to look at the learning experience. So what does the continuum look like from the learner's perspective? So starting on the left here, the learner can read something or see something or listen to something. And on the other end of the continuum, we have a really immersive, interactive type of an environment and a context. So what are some examples of these? So we've got a continuum from words and pictures and audio. And then we put moving pictures and audio together, so through video and animation. And then we have a degree of interaction here, so interactive content. So it's not just about reading, seeing and listening. It's not just about watching and leaning in. And I know I'm sticking to verbs there, but the reason why I've used the reason why I've used that phrase lean in is it's quite common in learning and development speak, which is, I'm so interested, I'm going to lean in and have a look closer. So what we find is that students and learners tend to lean in a little bit more for video because they're interested, as opposed to something that's more static, something that they read. The next step across is around interactive content. So interaction, being able to actually interact with the online content. So we're moving beyond words and videos and static into something that the learner can touch and feel and move around. The next level on is around immersion. So, sorry, I'll go back to the interactive content. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about things that can be drag and dropped, videos that can be interacted with, e-readers that the learner can stop and read and listen and see highlighted text as they go along. Where the learner is doing something, it becomes interactive. And then we have immersive content. So immersive is where the learners are actually immersed in an environment in a different way. And then we've got immersed and interactive. So the piece that I would like to focus more on is around words, pictures and audios, video and animation and interactive content, before we look at immersive content and immersive interactive content, which is kind of a little bit more of the next level. So what are some examples? So while I'm going to take like 10 seconds to scan through the text chat to make sure that I haven't missed any brilliant comments as you have a look at that. I'd like you to just take a couple of seconds to think about what are some examples of this type of content that you're familiar with, that you've seen, that you've used yourself, that you've created or produced yourself.
Thanks, Melanie. And while you're doing that, I can summarize a few of the questions that are coming in. Mainly, we've got some good examples coming up, which is great to see. And there's just a couple of sort of, how to explain it, just some standard questions about whether we're going to share the slides, and they will be shared at the end of the webinar. They'll be hosted on the Kaya Connect site, and then whether there'll be a certificate for this webinar. We're working on a digital badge, and I'll explain more about that at the end of the webinar. So those were some common questions, just answering quickly there.
Fantastic. So in the text chat, if you would, what are the most common ways, what are the most common sort of examples of on-demand content that you've seen? So is it more frequently that you've said that it's words and pictures and audio? Is it video and video with audio or animations? Is it interactive content that the participants and your learners can interact with? Is it immersive content, so virtual reality type of content, or 360 video, which is more immersive? Is it immersive and interactive? So the difference between immersive and interactive would be 3D video, 360 video that you can have a look around in, and immersive and interactive would be a 360 video with hotspots that you can touch and interact with, or virtual reality with haptic gloves so you can touch things in the environment. So you can see we've got some comments coming through. So we've got webinars, self-paced kind of read click modules, documents into online modules, with VR being very difficult. And absolutely, just picking up on that, I popped VR in there because it's an important thing to consider, but we're probably talking more about the first three for us. We've got documents for online modules, interactive content, interactive simulation. We've got a number of simulation coming up, which is really quite an excellent thing to see. Videos, interactive content with quizzes, click-throughs, social media connections, that sort of thing. Fabulous. Excellent, look at that. Lots of interactive content and simulations. Somebody's asked, is VR as expensive to set up for a simple simulation? There are, as you become more immersed, the costs do tend to increase. And one of the reasons for that is because it takes longer to develop. So we've got apps being used in the teaching and learning process. So I would consider apps to sit in that interactive content space. So actually kind of leads us perfectly into the concept, some of the considerations. So, oh, look at that. Videos being interesting to your students. Helen's asked, where do the social aspects fit in? So the ability to score points and leaderboards and gamified types of features. So I'd sit them under the interactive content. Though realistically, gamification intrinsically has an interactive component because the participant or the learner is going to interact with something and then get feedback as a result of that, which is slightly different to interacting with just pictures and videos and text and that sort of thing. But what I would like to say, because if we go back to that, you know, our list of participants in this room who don't know where to start, this here with text and words and pictures and graphics is a really great place to start. I've heard loads of learning designers say really poor things about, you know, Word documents and PDFs that are uploaded into learning management systems. But in a crisis situation, if that's all you've got, that's better than nothing. So I'd like to, you know, be kind to yourself. If you're working with a system of distributing documents and PDFs and photos and those sorts of things, that's okay, because you have to start somewhere. So one of the things that's come up in the text chat, which I think is a really critical thing, came up about communications, social media. You know, that's communications and social media. This is kind of more focused on the content side of things, but we do have to remember that learning is a very social experience, and we can improve our learning outcomes by putting social and communication included with it. So even though I'm not talking about it, I'm not saying that it's not important. It is very important. So what are some of the considerations when we're looking at building on-demand content? We need to think about our learner experience. Absolutely, number one, if you are the person who's developing online on-demand content, you need to be the person that's thinking about your learner experience, because you will have pressure from a range of different contexts, a range of different, you know, pressures, time, resourcing, managers, learners, time, stress. You need to think about your learners. And even though I said earlier about Word documents put into a learning management system, we can still focus on our learners having a really good learning experience, even if we're just, the only thing that we can do is provide them with Word documents. We can still provide them instructions. We can still provide them areas to reflect. We can still provide them areas to research or consider. We can still bring in things that they're doing from outside of a formal learning environment and get them to enhance their learning experience inside the learning environment. Edward's asked a great question about poor reading comprehension. I think I'd really like to table that until the end, because there's probably a lot to unpack in that question, Edward. I just want to flag with you that oftentimes when it comes to e-learning and educational technology, we need to think about the risks associated with them, and oftentimes they're overlooked, or the risks can undermine the success of our courses. So we need to consider the infrastructure that our learners have. We need to think about the human capacity. We need to think about the skills that our teachers have. We need to think about what is the right technology for a particular project or particular cohort of learners. What kind of ongoing support do you have for those projects? How do you design your online learning to make sure it is designed for scale, that it is sustainable, that it is backed by research, or that you have those research, the evidence processes to make sure that when you're making changes to the program, that's based on evidence. But one of the critical things, especially given that so many of you are working in that high school context, that, you know, sort of 40% of you working in the high school context, is we really need to put the child safety components at the core of our thinking. There are just simple things. So for example, just as an example, if you're embedding videos from YouTube or other sources, do they have links that link off to other areas that are not appropriate for children and young people? When you're using tools, are the terms and conditions appropriate for children and young people? So as an example, are the terms and conditions of a particular tool you're using, are they actually going to take that student's data and use it in ways that aren't appropriate? So child safety is a really important thing to think about. When we're thinking about what we're developing and how we're developing it, we need to also consider about the infrastructure and how we're distributing it. So what sort of distribution mechanisms do we have? Do we have television infrastructure? Do we have the ability to use interactive radio? Can we use SMS messages or WhatsApp? Can we use apps? What sort of digital curriculum and online open education resources are available? So oftentimes when we're thinking about online and on demand, we have a perception that it might be one particular way, when in actual fact, there's a number of ways that we can access our students. So I'm just going to pause here for a moment. Lisa, there is so much conversation coming through in the text chat. Are there any kind of key messages that I've lost?
Thanks, Melanie. Fantastic to see all the interaction on the chat, and it's a lot of participants sharing their ideas and experience. A lot of emphasis on, I think, like you were saying, not just about the materials, but the learner experience and about how to bring the different materials together. So it's not just one material that we're relying on when we're thinking about digital content. There's a question about what does it mean to design for scale? I might leave that one with you. And there was also a question about how do you get an Excel into a Google Slide document. I think we might be able to follow up on that one at the end.
Fabulous. The question around thinking about scale is one of the questions that caught my eye as well. And having worked in a range of learning organisations, from small ones to really, really large ones, and then coming and working with inclusive education, the concept of building for scale, it's just as much as how you approach it as the thing that you're building. So what often happens is that you have one person or one or two people who are all doing a great job, and they do their investigation and they find something, or they find a way of doing things. But then that person leaves, or that person isn't able to continue doing the job, and the project falls over. So thinking about scale is about thinking about how it moves beyond an individual classroom or an individual project, and how it can be scaled beyond that. So some of the other considerations are, and we don't have time to touch on them here, but I'm sure that there's other times that other webinar topics, is what is the role of the teacher or the instructor? What is the function of the content, and what is the role of the technology in the educational context? So one of the questions that came up earlier around, access to digital resources and digital literacy, it's a critical consideration when you're approaching the type of resources that you're going to be building. So that's what I'm going to move on to now, is thinking about the production approaches. So I'm going to duck forward a little bit because at the beginning of the session, I said that we were going to look at what online and on-demand looks like, some considerations for producing online content, on-demand online content, and some examples of where to start. But I also said there's a bonus. There's 3 things that you must consider when you're embarking on these types of pieces of work. So I'm going to duck ahead to that bonus tip. All right, the big bonus tip that I'm going to give you, it doesn't matter whether you're working by yourself or in a large organization, it is critical that you have a process. So I've got my brother-in-law is a cabinet maker, and he makes cabinets and kitchens for a living. And he told me this phrase, and it's stayed with me. I love it. You measure twice and you cut once. So keep that in the back of your mind as we go and we start to have a look at the production approaches. So when we're thinking about production approaches for the simple end of our continuum, the words, the pictures, the audio, you may have those things already. You may have Word documents or photocopies. You may have the ability to record the audio of yourself talking. When we're thinking about how we distribute simple content, we think about broadcasting. A television would be a big project, but something like interactive radio, recent research that's come out has shown that interactive radio is one of the most successful ways of engaging students who are in school that can't attend school. And that is literally a radio broadcast. So whether it's done via radio or whether it's done via like a 2G type of a network, where the instructor says, okay, this is the stuff that we're going to do. These are what the activities are. I'm going to pause now for a couple of minutes while you go and do that thing. So podcasts are one way of doing sharing audio. Interactive radio is that next level where it's not just listening to the podcast, it's actually becoming interactive in the sense that there are pause points and those sorts of things. So the words, the pictures, and the audio, we may have a lot of that stuff already. The challenge that we have when we are looking at producing on-demand content, which is simple words and pictures and audio, is that we live in a world where our media and marketing is saturating us. So our learners have a really high expectation of what their online experiences are going to be. So we're competing against people who have loads and loads of money in their marketing budgets. And we can't necessarily produce to that type of a level. So I've got somebody in the text chat saying the primary consideration always the context of the learners, their attention span, their readiness, their connectivity, all of those things need to be taken into account. So if we're thinking about static content, how we're going to distribute that, I'll just go back to my infrastructure diagram here. Okay, so if we're thinking about learning management systems or content management systems or portals as a way of distributing static content, or Dropboxes or Google Drive or Box.nets, there's a range of ways that we can distribute static content to our students. What's challenging is, are they reading it? Are they understanding it? How do we connect the teacher into that type of a process? So just because, as I've said earlier about being kind to yourself, it's okay to distribute content like this. It's a very important step, especially, it's a really important step. But just because you're distributing the content, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't take it to the next level. So we've got a range of, when it comes to videos, a range of video editing tools that you can use, that some of them can be purchased, some computers come with them already on them. We're also starting to see video editing tools that are subscription based that can be built very quickly. And one of the things that we've seen come out of the COVID situation is there are loads of organisations offering their products and services at low prices for you to give it a go. I am a little bit, I have to say, I'm a little bit concerned about some of these because they rope you in, they get you addicted with a free, a free test, and then they charge you the world afterwards. So I strongly encourage you to consider what you're locking yourself into in the future, and that's a part of making sure that your learning experiences are scalable and sustainable. But there's loads of video editing tools out there that are designed for people who aren't full-on video editors. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second and then reflect on the text chat. Lisa, anything coming through on the text chat around Melanie. That simple content?
Yeah, there's a couple of great ones referring back to, I want to capture the word interactive that you were talking about, and there was a lot of questions about how to keep students' attention, especially if it's, you've got these sort of online distractions. What is a way to keep students' attention? There was one participant who said that game-based learning is a great example of letting people learn for longer. And another question coming up was how to produce digital content for learners who might not have a lot of experience with using online tools, whether that's because they're kindergarten students or because they have limited access and therefore limited experience to something like a learning platform.
Yeah. The that last point around on-demand content for students, early childhood, and the younger grades with primary school it's a massive challenge. And when I look at learning management systems and when I look at content management systems, they are geared to an older and potentially adult audience because of the way that their navigation structures and those sorts of things are built. So oftentimes what I've seen is that with student cohorts like that, they tend to be more bespoke types of products or specialized products that have been customized into that audience. So it doesn't, I know that it doesn't answer the question, it just throws more questions up there. The issue of the age of students is really, is a real challenging one. The digital literacy of students, again, that's still it's still a challenge, but we need to make sure that we're developing the digital literacies of our students. That's, I think, a key message from what we've seen and what we've experienced in the COVID-19 space is that people who don't have the digital literacy and they don't have the technologies, the gap is getting wider, which is going to make a significant challenge for us as we move into the new normal. So there was a question that you mentioned first about, now I'm remembering, gamification, Lisa. Yes. So that concept of gamification, what is the role of the teacher within the learning process when we go back to our considerations, having the ability to have gamified concepts within your on-demand learning. They don't necessarily have to be something that's custom coded into a learning management system. The teacher can include those things. That's a part of having online and offline experiences for your learners. So if we think about this, this continuum, words and pictures, and we move into the interactive content, one of the things that I would, that I would welcome any sort of discussion on is I'm being very specific using the word interactive instead of engaging. In the past, people would talk about engaging content. My students are engaged in my content. And the question that I would ask is, how do you measure engagement? Is it how long you look at the screen? Is it how many words they read in a paragraph? Is it how much screen time they have, because, you know, we do have research about not having students, especially young learners, in front of screens for a long time. So how would you measure engagement? My personal experience with learning experience is sometimes the learning experience that I have when I leave the classroom, or when I leave the screen, or when I finish watching something and doing something, and I have that thought, oh, I never thought of it like that before. That's the gem of the learning experience that you want to capture. So I might not be engaged with something that I see on the screen, but if that thing prompts me to think about something differently, that's the learning experience. So what I've done is I've been calling it interactive content, so that the students are interacting, or your learners are interacting with the content. So when we think about our continuum again, can I interact with the words on the page? Not necessarily. People think of videos as being engaging, and I've used that I mentioned before, leaning into the video, but a video itself is not necessarily interactive. Even though it might be engaging, it might not be interactive. So what we need to do is consider ways that we can make our content interactive. We've got tools available to us now, and I've had a couple of people ask about the tools that I'm talking about. I've tried to remove the names of the tools, but I'm very, very happy to share this with you. What I'm talking about here is H5P, which is an open source online content development tool. It plugs into learning management systems like Moodle. It plugs into websites and content management systems like WordPress and Drupal and those sorts of things. And what it has a series of almost templated interactions. So as an example, a crossword, that's not a crossword, sorry, that find a word, hotspots, quizzes, those sorts of things are a way of building interactive content without having to have a proprietary or a licensed product like Articulate Storyline or Captivate. Gerald's put in the channel on the text chat, Edpuzzle. How about if, while I spruik how much I love H5P, everybody slam into the text chat, what are some ways of quickly or easily or lovingly building interactive content that can go in your on-demand courses. So your time starts now. Edupuzzle, Text Twist, H5P. H5P, very easy to access. Crossword puzzles. Minecraft, oh yes. Bringing games in. Bringing games into your on-demand learning is a very good thing. Jamboard, I haven't seen that before, but that is going to be something that I'm going to take away with me. Kahoot. I'm going to guess Kahoots. Normally, I see lots of Kahoots in schools. Quizzer, Socratic, Mentimeter, that's a fantastic quiz. Ask them. Flipgrid, ClassDojo, Google Classroom, memes, lots of memes coming up, very good. More Kahoots. I'm sure that at the end of this, if you go away with H5P and Kahoots and Quizzes and Padlet, there's probably a number of tools that you could investigate very easily. So one of the things that I think is really important to think about is, like I mentioned, we think about video as being engaging, but is it interactive? No, it's not necessarily interactive. So how do you build in video that's interactive? We build in video that's interactive by having videos that stop, that branch, that offer quizzes, that offer feedback while the learners are watching the video. So there are some license systems that do this, and H5P does that as well. So when we're thinking about the process And Eduardo is popped up there, created software online and offline programs. It's probably online versus offline, and patchy internet access is probably something I should have added to our considerations. I'll put that on the list and pretend that I had that at the beginning. Eduardo, thank you for raising that. When we're thinking about the continuum of moving from words and pictures to moving pictures and animations to interactive content, so let's look at a book which is made with paper. A book is converted into a PDF and uploaded into a learning management system. A book that has graphics put into it. A book where videos are included into it. A book where there's videos that you can stop, and that as you are reading the book, you can have the book read to you, or there's text highlighting on the screen. This is a continuum approach to developing on-demand materials. So as I said earlier, don't be frustrated if you're starting with words and pictures and Word documents, because that's a really, really great and fantastic place to start. So, okay, let me have a look at our agenda. So we've got time for questions, and we can delve into this brilliant pool of text chat that we have. So what does on-demand look like? What does online and on-demand look like? What are some considerations for producing on-demand and online content? And what are some examples and where to start? So we've covered those three things. We've covered one bonus thing of what to think about, which is have a process. The two other bonus tips that I'm going to give you are to think about the skills that are required, the skills that you have in your team, whether it's the learning experience designer, which is a relatively new word for educational designer or instructional designer, a graphics specialist, a technical specialist, a subject matter expert. It's very rare to find somebody who can be a learning designer who's fantastic at graphics and really great with the technical side of things. So it's really hard to find a learning designer who's a graphic designer, who's a technical expert and a subject matter expert. So think about what it is that you're trying to achieve. What are the considerations around what the role of the content is, and the teacher and the learner and the functions, the addressing the risks and how you're going to distribute that content? There's a lot there. Just because it's difficult, just because it's complex, it doesn't mean that it has to be hard. So the question that came up earlier about scale, the best piece of advice or the hint that I can, and tip that I can give you around scale, is that templates can help ensure consistency when you're creating multiple courses. Standards can help you create courses and do quality checking to make sure that you are developing a consistency across all the courses. And don't forget to think about how the content is going to be maintained. So as an example, if you scope a piece of work and decide to get that outsourced, which is a really important thing to do on some projects, how are they going to maintain it? Are you going to maintain it? Are they going to train you how to maintain it? If you're looking at a tool that lets you produce cartoons and they give you a 6-month free trial because of COVID-19, what are they going to charge you at the end of it? So templates help you ensure consistency across multiple courses. Standards help you with quality checking across multiple, teachers and multiple year levels and multiple projects. And don't forget to make sure that your maintenance has been included in there. So 5 minutes. How's that, Lisa? 5-minute time for questions.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Melanie. Brilliant. I've been keeping an eye on the chat, and we've got some great ones in Q&A, mainly again asking for examples of different tools, different platforms to use. I'm keen if it's possible to share a couple of examples a little bit later, which we have on the Kaya Connect platform, which might hopefully answer some of the questions that are coming up here.
So what Lisa has done for us wonderfully is she's put together a Google Doc. So with the recording of this, we've got a Google document that's got some links in it. So Kaya have very lovingly prepared a lot of work for us. So in the links in that Google document, you can see links to toolkits, so concept building, some gamification, immersive film, chatbot building. Oh, excuse me while there's some examples of animations. We've got a great link in there to some VR, and then we've got some information there around interactive VR. So thinking about the difference between virtual reality, which is an immersive environment, as opposed to immersive and interactive. So let's have a look at that text chat again. We've got 3 or 4 minutes before our hour is over. Let's have a look. Jason's asked, how do you ensure learners are really learning in a technology-enabled environment? And how do you make sure that they're learning in a face-to-face environment or a classroom environment? You build in ways to talk to them, to communicate with them, to give them the ability to have knowledge checks or skills checks. You build in that two-way communication. You give them opportunities to practice their skills, to demonstrate what they've learned. So if we think about online on demand as just being, hey, there's a really great app that we've purchased a subscription to you, I can guarantee that's probably not as engaging as that app might be, as interactive as that app might be. It's not necessarily going to connect people to the learning environment and to the learning process. One of the most brilliant things that has come out in the last, X number of years is Minecraft. So games, gamification, we've mentioned that a couple of times already, but Minecraft is an absolutely superb game for learning. But what's key in using Minecraft in an education context is the way that the teacher uses it and the way that the teacher engages with their students and with the learners to say, hey, when you did this thing, what happened next? When you did that thing, what are you going to do in real life? What would you do in real life? So.
Thanks, Melanie. I might see if you're able to answer one more question, or at least be able to signpost learners on.
Yes.
Is that possible? There's been a couple of questions about learners with disabilities and what to consider. I appreciate that's a big question for the time frame that we have, but if you have any quick tools or signposting.
Yes, I haven't. We could probably do a whole session around learners with disabilities. I think one of the things that we need to be aware of is there's some really great standards and guidance for creating on-demand online content for learners, or for people with disabilities, that we can appropriate into an educational context. So they're the Web Accessibility Guidelines, so WCAG, WCAG. So when we're thinking about building online content, or when you're thinking about purchasing online content, or when you're thinking about how you engage with service providers to help you build on-demand content, we need to make sure that they're meeting Web Accessibility Guidelines. And what that means is that, just as a simple example, if I can't see the video there, can I have a transcript so that I can read that, or I can hear that and have that transcript given to me? If I can't see, if I can't use the keyboard with my my hand, can I still tab through and access the content in different ways? So yeah, that's more about, it's less about the technology and more about the content itself, but I'd strongly recommend you to have a look at Web Accessibility Guidelines.
Thanks. Sorry for throwing that one in right at the end, but I thought it was important, and it links to, I think, something that we could talk about for a long time. Fantastic.
Excellent. So thank you so much for inviting me, Lisa. I really appreciate it. I'm so just ecstatically pleased. 264 people, and that amount of chat is just phenomenal. Thank you all so much for coming along. There's a few questions in the Q&A that I can see we haven't addressed. I'm going to stay back a few minutes to address those things. So my name is Melanie Worrell. I work with Inclusive Education. I welcome you to reach out. I'm on LinkedIn. Lisa's going to share all of the notes for this, but just thanks for coming along, and Lisa, thanks for inviting me.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Melanie. And yeah, really enjoyed it. I definitely took away a lot of great tips as well. So thank you so much for that. I'm just going to direct everyone back to the Kaya course page. You'll have already signed up for this, but this is where we'll be keeping the recording. This is where we'll share the slides afterwards, and we'll also have a list of those tools that everyone has mentioned in the chat. So thank you so much for that. And then the next webinar is going to be on creating the conditions to help your learning communities thrive. So this is really sort of focusing in what Melanie was talking about how to be engaged and interactive, and also the opportunity to learn from each other, just like we've done today.